Right now, you're sitting in a dark room staring intently at a glowing screen, willfully paying your hard-earned money to watch a masked killer stalk terrified teenagers through the woods. Your pulse is racing, your palms are sweating, and your nervous system is actively screaming at you to stand up, run out the door, and never look back. You did this over the weekend, or maybe you are scrolling through a streaming menu planning to do it tonight, completely ignoring your body's survival instincts for the sake of entertainment. We call it a fun movie night, but this bizarre urge to seek out artificial terror is actually one of the absolute oldest behavioral adaptations in the history of our species. It is older than cinema, older than writing, and older than farming itself. The question is, why did our ancestors code this apparent glitch directly into the human brain, and how did a brutal mechanism designed to keep us from being eaten alive turn into a multi-billion-dollar pop culture phenomenon? To understand why your brain craves a good jump scare, we have to travel back long before the invention of Hollywood, cameras, or even houses. We have to go back roughly 2 million years to the vast, unforgiving savannas of East Africa. Imagine our early human ancestor, a fragile, upright walking primate we will call stick figure Bob. Bob did not have claws. He did not have sharp fangs. He could not outrun a lion, and his hide was thin and entirely unprotected. In the grand hierarchy of the prehistoric wild, Bob was essentially a walking protein bar. Every single bush, tall patch of grass, or dark cave contour could hide a predator looking to turn him into dinner. If Bob's brain operated the way our brains do during a relaxing Sunday stroll, Bob would have survived about 4 days. To keep Bob alive, evolution had to develop a highly sophisticated, hyper-vigilant piece of internal software. Scientists call this the threat simulation mechanism. Bob's brain became an incredibly advanced round-the-clock movie generator, but it only played one genre, absolute horror. When Bob heard a faint rustling in the bushes, he did not assume it was a gentle evening breeze. He assumed it was a hyper-lethal predator waiting to pounce. When he sat by the flickering campfire at night, staring out into the pitch-black abyss, his mind automatically filled the shadows with terrifying, bloodthirsty monsters. He was constantly visualizing the worst-case scenario. He was playing a horror movie inside his own head. But here is the twist. Evolution aggressively rewards the paranoid. The early humans who spent their downtime visualizing terrifying threats were highly prepared when those threats actually showed up in the real world. They already knew exactly which tree to climb, which rock to throw, and which direction to run because they had already rehearsed the nightmare 100 times in their heads. The laid-back, overly optimistic humans who assumed the rustling bush was just a harmless breeze did not live long enough to pass on their genes. They were eliminated from the pool. You are the direct, unbroken descendant of the most anxious, hyper-imaginative, terror-simulating primates to ever walk the earth. Your brain is quite literally wired to think about monsters. As time marched on, this internal threat simulator needed a collective space to run its diagnostic tests, which brings us to our next major evolutionary milestone. Let us jump forward to roughly 36,000 years ago, deep inside the Chauvet Cave in modern-day southern France. Archaeologists exploring these dark, winding caverns discovered something incredible painted on the stone walls. It was not just random stick figures or peaceful landscapes. The walls were covered in dynamic, terrifying depictions of apex predators, massive cave lions, woolly rhinoceroses, and predatory mammoths charging through the dark. Think about the sheer logistics of this. Our ancestors had to navigate deep, pitch-black subterranean tunnels using nothing but crude fat-burning torches that threw long, flickering, distorting shadows against the stone. When the torchlight hit those painted cave lions, the animals appeared to move, breathe, and leap directly out of the darkness. It was the world's very first primitive cinema experience. Anthropologists believe these caves were not just art galleries. They were high-stakes classrooms for the young members of the tribe. Elders would lead the youth into the terrifying dark, show them the monsters, and tell gripping, frightening stories about how these beasts hunt and how they kill. It was a controlled environment where you could experience the overwhelming psychological horror of a cave lion attack without actually getting your throat ripped out. That is a survival seminar disguised as a ghost story. But here is the problem. As humans became more successful, we eventually climbed to the absolute top of the food chain. We built sturdy walls, forged metal weapons, domesticated fire, and cleared out the predators. By the time the grand ancient civilizations rose, the everyday threat of being ambushed by a wild beast had plummeted to near zero. Yet, our biology did not care that we lived in safe brick houses. The ancient software never received a patch update. Your gray matter still firmly believes it is living in the Stone Age, and it is profoundly convinced that a leopard is waiting to ambush you around every single corner. Because we now live in the safest era in human history, our internal threat simulation software is completely, utterly bored. It has no real-world predators to analyze, no immediate life or death stakes to process, and no regular adrenaline dumps to keep the physical machinery oiled and calibrated. Here is what makes this so incredibly important. When a psychological system built for high-stakes survival is suddenly left with nothing to do, it does not just shut off. It looks for an outlet. If you do not give the threat simulator something to process, it turns inward, generating chronic anxiety, restlessness, and a deep-seated feeling that something is terribly wrong. We needed a way to manually activate the system, to trigger the alarm, and then safely turn it off again. We needed to manufacture fear. This biological hunger explains the explosive rise of the very first commercial horror properties in human history. Let us flash forward to the year 1764 in England. A writer named Horace Walpole published a strange, dark book called The Castle of Otranto. It featured a gloomy, decaying castle, supernatural curses, bleeding statues, and an overwhelming sense of dread. It was the world's first true Gothic horror novel, and society went absolutely wild for it. People stayed up late by candlelight, their hearts hammering, reading about terrifying ghosts and ancient curses. They were willfully terrifying themselves in the safety of their bedrooms. Why did they love it? Because Walpole had accidentally discovered a neurological loophole. When you read a terrifying description or watch a monster pop out from the shadows on a screen, your amygdala, the ancient primitive almond-shaped alarm system deep inside your brain, instantly fires. The amygdala is incredibly fast, but it is also incredibly stupid. It cannot tell the difference between a pixelated killer on a movie screen and a real-life threat chasing you down an alley. It immediately triggers the fight-or-flight response. It floods your bloodstream with a massive cocktail of adrenaline, cortisol, and glucose. Your heart hammers against your ribs, your pupils dilate, your breathing grows shallow, and your entire body prepares for a brutal life or death struggle. But a split second later, your modern, highly advanced prefrontal cortex chimes in. It takes a quick look around, notices the warm bucket of buttered popcorn sitting in your lap, recognizes the soft theater seat under your body, and sends a comforting message to the rest of your brain. Hey, false alarm, relax. It is just a movie. We are totally safe. This creates an extraordinary euphoric biological paradox. You get the raw, exhilarating, high-octane chemical rush of surviving a deadly predator attack, but with absolute physical safety. It is a total biological cheat code. The moment your brain realizes you are safe, it immediately floods your system with dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins to reward you for surviving the danger. You feel intensely alive, focused, and flooded with a natural high. We do not actually love being terrified. We love the intoxicating chemical euphoria of realizing we are safe. Over the last century, we took this exact chemical loophole and turned it into a massive global industry. In the early 1900s, audiences screamed and fainted in dark theaters at the sight of silent black and white monsters. By the 1970s and 80s, directors were using advanced audio engineering, eerie synth music, and realistic practical effects to target our evolutionary fears with mathematical precision. High-frequency sounds, dark color palettes, and sudden kinetic movements are all carefully designed to exploit the exact visual vulnerabilities Stick Figure Bob had to worry about on the savannah. We didn't stop running the threat simulation game. We just perfected the delivery system. So here is the full picture. 2 million years ago, your ancestors developed a hyper-anxious mind to avoid being eaten by giant cats. 36,000 years ago, they painted those monsters on cave walls to teach survival through storytelling. In the 18th century, we turned that dread into literature to satisfy a bored nervous system. And today, we use million-dollar digital effects to simulate the exact same primal terrors. When you sit in that theater tonight, waiting for the monster to jump out of the dark, you are not engaging in some weird, modern, masochistic habit. You are simply running a routine maintenance check on the ancient prehistoric survival software that kept your bloodline alive through the Ice Age. The screen is just our modern campfire, and the monsters keep us human. If you want to explore more weird glitches in human biology, stick around.